The dark, wet alley was slightly illuminated by Sarah's cell phone light, as she shined it every few seconds to see where she was headed. Her eyes scanned the darkness, and she shook crazily. What happened to her last night was a mystery. She thought back at the bar. She had just came in with some friends, and just for a fun night. Nothing could have happened, or so she thought. Now she was trembling, walking from building to building at 3 in the morning. Again, she thought back, but everything was a blur. She passed an old ratty motel and a pub. Sarah made her way to the outskirts of her neighborhood, around a heavily wooded area. She walked, clenching her eyes shut tightly for moments at a time. She was huddled in her coat for warmth as the cold rain covered her in what seemed like an eternity. Just as her eyelids took cover of her eyes, something shined out of the corner of her vision. She instantly flashed her eyes open again, and her pupils became wide. She looked around. Nothing stood out in the darkness and rain. She spun around and continued her way back, hoping she would make it home. As she studied her surroundings, she remembered a shortcut that she took as a kid when playing hide and seek with her childhood playmates. It involved climbing through the woods. The cold woman hesitated, but came to the decision that anything that would get her to her warm home quicker is a better way. Sarah headed towards the forest. As she made her way in, the first tree she laid eyes on had been marked. What was on the marking on the tree mystified her. It looked like a circle with an X inside. She knew nothing of its origin or meaning, so she just assumed that it was some kind of gang symbol or something of the sort. Making her way into the forest, she recalled the fun times she had as a kid. She thought to herself out loud, I miss those times. Back when the world was her voice trailed off. Sarah heard a loud crack of a tree off in the distance behind her. Terrified, she began running through the woods, and she soon became lost. She continued anyway, hoping to find her way out. Her lacking of caution quickly resulted in her leg being caught on a near-lying root, and she fell to the ground. Attempting to get up caused her even more pain. She twisted her ankle. Somebody, please! Somebody help me! She called out. The crunching of the leaves became present again. She attempted to stand and run once again, but her injury kept her in place. She clenched her eyes shut out of fear. As she opened them again, a tall, white man dressed in a suit stood before her. She became visually impaired at the sight of the man. She began screaming in terror, but was soon silenced by the slender, pale man that stood before her in the dark. 4 o'clock. What once was a young boy was now a cold-blooded psychopath. Jeff the killer had just finished what he called his daily rounds. The slaughtering of innocent people that was almost all that flooded Jeff's mind. He dragged his feet up the wet cement as he entered what he had called his home for years. Jeff stepped foot into a world of tragic memories, clutching 2 whiskey bottles in his hand. Jeff had become a drunken killing machine. His brain was filled with a sense of murder. One thought did cross his psychopathic mind there since day one. As rain hit the Wary house, Jeff began to recall the night of which he slaughtered his entire family. He chuckled at the thought. It wasn't for his sanity. He may have thought about regret, remorse for taking the lives of the people he once loved, but that was impossible at this point. Jeff was out for one thing, and only one thing: death. 5 o'clock in the morning, he took another swing at his alcohol. What in the fuck am I sitting here for? Jeff buzzed. As he got up to make his way into the night, he swerved a bit and took another chug at his whiskey. The alcohol hit his warm, bloody lips, and he felt an odd sensation. A sudden urge had hit him. He stood in the room, gazing out at the forest behind his house. He checked his pockets, cigarettes, a lighter, and of course his knife. Jeff knew that something wasn't right. The feeling he got was a mix of the urge to kill again and something far different from what he had felt before. He stormed out of his home into the cold, wet night. Jeff was now in the dark street, his only source being a lamp illuminating the road. The rain still pouring hit Jeff's back. He started to move in the direction of the forest. He struggled a bit. His alcohol composition that night had been extremely high. The killer approached his desolation forest. Before he entered, he took a quick glare to his left. Jeff was not far from a cemetery. He trembled towards it. A thought blew into his mind, almost like the wind of a breezy afternoon. The last piece of his family was only a few feet away, and it beckoned him. He moved his feet away from the forest and towards the graveyard. Slowly Jeff walked, yet he tripped a few times, spanning the short distance. He approached the grave. Jeff glanced at it with the odd odor of death, his jacket being covered in blood and the remains of his victims. Jeff simply glanced at the cold slab of granite. His vision was too distorted to make out any sort of words. Because of this, he just stood and stared. Jeff's insides began to feel uneasy, and his throat became dry, the same feeling just minutes before. Jeff stumbled back to the forest while trembling towards the woodland. His eyes wandered to a tree a few feet further than the others. What looked like a small grayish piece of paper could be seen hanging by a nail. His eyes blurred. He was unable to read it. He took no attempt either, and crept into the darkness slowly, almost as if he recognized this place, as if it was his true home. Squeezing his 2 whiskey bottles, he studied the forest into a darkening haze. Jeff admired the darkness. It reminded him of a black alleyway, one where the murderer could easily slash the neck of his victims without being seen. As he continued walking, Jeff became in the way and frosted. The empty blackness swirled around him, muttering to himself in unrecognizable gibberish. He continued to trot. Something felt a bit odd. The crunching of leaves seemed too loud to account for only one person. Jeff felt as if something was lurking behind his line of sight. "Who's there?" Jeff growled. An ambulance of noise could be heard, but nothing out of the ordinary. Chirps and crickets grew louder as Jeff studied his surroundings. "Come on, chicken. I don't really like games, and not hide-and-seek at all." As Jeff announced this, a quick rustling from a nearby bush could be heard. He slashed at it before the sound could be silenced of his own. Jeff then saw what was hidden out of his sight this entire time. "Damn rat! You're just good-for-nothing pest," Jeff proclaimed as the rodent scurried from the leaves. After he had seen what was hidden in the bush, he continued his midnight stroll. The rain crashing against his back came to a slow stop. His vision became very blurry, and a loud noise was growing in his head. What could be heard from a figment of Jeff's insane imagination, for the woods were completely silent. He tampered around, dragging his feet and cursing at the almost unbearable noise. Nothing like it had pierced his ears with such discount before. The noise that drowned Jeff became very absent. From the pain, Jeff fell to a tree. Both bottles that were once clenched to his hands fell towards the ground. One crashed against the bark and shattered everywhere. The cracks of glass had vigorously dragged Jeff back into his consciousness. As his eyes readjusted to the darkness once more, the blurriness was magnified as Jeff saw a white overall-like object hovering above him. His eyes quickly focused from shock, but what had been in front of him a few seconds ago was nowhere to be found. "What the fuck was that?" Jeff chuckled at his own remark. Was his mind playing tricks on him? "Now I know that ain't no damn rat." He hesitantly came to the conclusion that something had been lurking in the darkness, following him from a distance. "That's it. I'm done playing games. Where the fuck are you, bastard?" Jeff screamed to the top of his lungs and hoped that some kind of response. He was answered abruptly. As he turned to walk again, and he felt the slightest tingle in his neck. "That's not the damn man, fucker. Get the hell out of the bushes before I decide to fuck you up." Jeff felt wind at this point. Nothing about this place was right, but he was enjoying every single minute of it. Swiftly, he pulled his shining blade out of his coat pocket and began slashing at the trees in the darkness. "Come on out, you bitch!" he cried out. "No hiding now. I'll cut every last chip of bark to slit your throat." Jeff pointed his knife towards a tall, thin tree protruding from the left of his vision and stabbed it. He was astonished to see that in one direct contact, the tree, or what he thought was a tree, faded away into the darkness in a matter of milliseconds. Not knowing what to do, he glanced quickly towards his right, instead the black of night. He peered out the woods and saw not what he expected. He stood there. The psychotic boy was an extremely tall, thin man dressed in a clean black suit. This is all that Jeff could make out at the time. The rain caused Jeff's sight to become more immediately disoriented. Jeff's eyes had cleared again, and he quickly began to observe the man. He was ematic. His pale face was almost pure white in color. As Jeff studied his face, he soon came to notice the lack of features on this man. This thing's face was completely empty. No eyes, no nose or mouth. At a white blank head, this made Jeff feel a bit uneasy, and he soon broke out to laughter. Although astonished, Jeff soon addressed the figure before him. So you're the bastard chasing me through the woods, huh? Jeff stared at the blackness once more. You know, I don't know what the fuck you are, but you kind of remind me of myself. You got the nice white face, but all you're missing is a smile. Jeff began laughing uncontrollably at his own notion, yet he was stopped. Jeff's ears were assaulted by static, and he fell to the ground. This was shuttered in complete darkness as he clenched his ears for mercy. The figure Jeff early questioned was now causing Jeff extreme pain, while the place where his eyes should have been staring directly into Jeff's. At the point, Jeff snapped. He broke free of the pain and drew his knife once more and began slashing. Each one of his moves were futile, as the man moved around in no time at all, almost as if he was teleporting from place to place to avoid attacks. The tall being began to fight back. Jeff had just now begun to notice the tendrils hanging from the back of his attacker. They grabbed at Jeff, and his response was to swing his knife at what came near him. Jeff managed to slice what seemed to be an arm. In almost an instant, the limb grew quickly back in place. For what had happened astonished Jeff. He felt almost as if the man was a tall tree and his tendrils simply branches. Jeff fled the forest, knowing that there was no way he would be able to fight whatever his adversary truly was in what seemed to be his home territory. Jeff rushed from his attacker and found himself at the same spot where he had entered. To the right of him lay the cemetery, open space. As he ran past the trees, he noticed that lie away from the others, the same tree from before. He ran it out of instinct and read the note had seen from a distance before. Do not enter these woods at night. A tall man has been spotted in the area recently. Some call him Slenderman. Beware and enter at your own risk. Whatever the being had stalked him from the woods before was referred to as Slenderman. The name fit perfectly as the description of a tall white figure. Jeff hurried towards the graveyard where he waited for his foe, wielding his sharp, bloody knife. Jeff's wish had been granted as the Slenderman approached from the woods. It seemed as if it was hesitant to leave its home court. Despite its hesitance, it left the area anyway and quickly rushed towards Jeff. The psychopath instinct started to kick back, and he jumped towards the tall man. Jeff was quickly grabbed by his enemy and thrown against a nearby tree. Jeff proceeded to swing again at the tendrils and then grabbed him. He was able to slash at one of the Slenderman's main arms. Blood oozed from the deep cut. The white figure showed no emotion and began to scratch at Jeff once again. As he continued to smash Jeff against trees and stab rocks, Jeff's knife slipped from his grip and fell to the ground with Jeff colliding with the ground. Jeff's knife slid into his own stomach in a matter of seconds. Blood poured from the wound, and soon to the ground was covered in a red liquid. He stood up with a jolt. Is this the best you got, Slendy? I've taken worse beatings from my father's belt than your weak twig arms. The slender man remained silent, but continued fighting. The man reached for a piece of granite from a tombstone, but before he could take a hold of it, Jeff jerked the knife from his gut and flung it directly at Slenderman. Jeff's accuracy was precise, and it sliced off one of the main limbs. Slenderman's left arm was completely gone, as it fell to the ground with a thud. It was quickly met with thick blood as it drained from his shoulder. It was completely drenched in blood. Slenderman briskly disappeared into the darkness, but illuminated behind Jeff, in his right hand, he had a piece of granite that he proceeded to slam into the side of Jeff's head. Jeff fell to the ground once again, almost knocked unconscious. He was not left there for long before he was seized by his assailant and thrown against the grave. The stone exploded on impact with Jeff. Standing up once again, Jeff's eyes focused on the name of the grave. As his eyes crossed the name of the grave, his black eyes widened. The words written across the gray stab was recognized by Jeff in an instant. It read out his brother's name, Lou. Something was coursing through Jeff. Rage filled with an instant, and he lashed out at Slenderman at extreme speeds. Jeff's knife was slashing through his suit as well as his pale skin. Slenderman began teleporting towards the force, Come on, bitch. I'm not finished with you yet. I want to help you go to sleep, Randy. You look awfully tired. Whatever was flowing through Jeff caused his insanity to go overdrive state. He had become delusional. He ran at Slenderman and back into the forest. He rushed through the woods, not observing his environment whatsoever. Jeff was deep into the forest, still piercing the man. Slenderman continued wrapping around the forest. Jeff's lack of caution caused him to trip on a branch lying in his way. As he crashed to the ground, sharp shards of glass pierced him, and the contents of his pocket were flown out. The items scattered to the ground as Jeff looked up with his mangled, bloody face. The scent of alcohol graced him. Jeff knew he had been here before. He had fallen on the tree and dropped his bottle. Jeff desperately searched the ground for his knife. He felt his hand grab a hold of something worn. What wrapped around Hope was his blade. Jeff had grabbed his lighter. He quickly scraped at it, hoping that a small flame would provide a source of light. His bloody hands covered the plastic in the red liquid. After many desperate attempts, a small orange flame was produced. Jeff threw the lighter out in front of him as he attempted to find his knife that lay close to him. Before he could make another movement, Slenderman suddenly appeared before him. The smooth white face that had been seen was now covered in slashes and dark blood. Even though he looked hurt, Slenderman remained strong. Jeff's grip on the lighter became loose. His blood had caused friction between it and his hand. The small blaze dropped towards the ground. Instant flames scorching through the lighter hit the ground. Both advisors fled away from the flame. Before either of them could put their distance between themselves and the flame, it was ignited by the alcohol that soiled the ground. In a matter of seconds, the forest was burning up. Jeff looked for safety, but yet none was found in the flames. Slenderman thought nothing of this and continued to swing at Jeff. Jeff fought back, ignoring the orange and red covering his environment. The tall monster grabbed at Jeff. Jeff grabbed his knife and jumped. To no avail, Jeff was pulled by the Slenderman and was now stuck in his grip. Slenderman began to shake Jeff off as he did this. Jeff bit at him, and a loud crack of bone became heard. The pain surged through Slenderman at a shock, and he threw it against Jeff at a large tree. As Jeff flew towards the tree, a sharp pain hit Jeff's back. It continued. He saw a large branch slide through his torso, and he hit the base of the tree. Jeff had been viciously impaled by a large tree branch. Blood gushed through his mouth and open wound as he screamed out in pain. Slenderman then fled. He ran to an area of safety where the forest had been not burned as of yet. He watched Jeff as he attempted to escape. At this point, the Slenderman knew that escape was impossible. The white monster could hear Jeff screaming even from a large distance away. He continued to wrap around from his territory and left Jeff to burn in the flames. The blaze became brighter and surrounded Jeff. Struggling to avoid the intense heat, he violently slid his body from the tree. Fire engulfed Jeff. Everything swirled around him. He became wrapped up into the flames. There was no hope for Jeff. He had lost his mind long ago. Yet this was different. He had reached his limit, and his state of mind burned just as the forest did. A young lady by the name of Sarah Burgress had been reported missing, and she has last seen at the Drop-In Bar and Grill at around 9 o'clock p.m. If you have any idea on the whereabouts of Sarah Burgess, please call the home station at 404-835-HELP. In other news, a major forest fire has the remains of the forest. The fire had been extinguished. This will hurt much of the animal life found in the once heavy-wooded forest. We'll bring more in the story as it comes. Mark turned off the TV and slumped in the couch cushion. Hey, honey, you want to go take a look at the forest? Well, that's left of it. They put the fire out that burned that damn thing to good. There's also a missing girl. Maybe we'll find her while we're there. Can we do it some other time? I'm kind of busy right now, Mark. And if the police can't find that girl, there's no way in hell we can. Julia protested. Mark argued, come on, it won't hurt anything. It wouldn't be more than a 5-minute walk. All right, I guess, but 5 minutes only. The man put on his shoes and left his house with his wife. As they strolled towards the burnt house, they could see something moving in the opposite direction. It looked somewhat human. As they moved closer towards it, they noticed that it looked like it had several burns on its face. The face was completely white, the hints of gray where it looked like it had been burnt. Its long black hair was mingled. They came closer towards it, and Mark shouted, Hey, buddy, do you need some help? Mark bellowed. Mark, stop. We don't even know who he is. He could be a fucking killer for all we know, Julia whispered, frightened. The man moved swiftly towards the couple. As he approached them, he drew a quick blade covered in red liquid. I don't, but I can tell you need help to sleep. Jeff slashed the knife across the man's neck and he fell to the ground. His wife began to scream loudly. She was unable to continue as she was next. She was stabbed directly in the heart with a knife. You don't need to worry about me. Just go to sleep.